Jaguars wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. finds himself in some elite company as far as rookie season production goes. Just how high should he be valued in your dynasty leagues? We'll discuss all that and more on today's episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Magdziuk.
Welcome into the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You could start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On today's show, we are without my co-host, Marcus Mosher, but in his place, we have a very special guest, very talented special guest, Michelle Magdziuk, co-host of the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast with Vinny Iyer, researcher for NFL Network, and of course, my wife. How's it going, Michelle?
Hey, I'm excited to be here talking about some winners and losers from week 15. Man, it was a crazy week.
It was a crazy week, and hopefully those winners came through for those contending dynasty rosters, but we're going to talk about all of it. We're going to talk about the winners, the losers, even those players that maybe have us a little bit confused coming out of week 15 in terms of like what in the world their dynasty value is. But Michelle, there has to be no doubt that Jaguars wide receiver Brian Thomas Jr. is in the winners category.
Yeah, I mean, he was a steal this year, not only in redraft leagues where you got him really late, but also in dynasty leagues. Like, yeah, he was a first-round pick, but he was not considered close to the values of Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors coming out when you're taking him, and he's outperforming both of those guys. I mean, destroying Marvin Harrison Jr. because he's been a letdown. We'll talk about that later. But Brian Thomas Jr. leads all rookies with 956 yards, 8 touchdowns. His receiving yards are 8th most in the league among all players, not just rookies. His receiving touchdowns are tied for 5th most among all players, again, not just rookies. And he's on pace to have over 1,000 yards this year. And that puts him in with a special group of rookies who have all went on to have really nice careers. So Brian Thomas Jr. is such a big winner this year.
Okay, tell us how we should contextualize his season in terms of like big picture. What are we talking in terms of like his production compared to some of the all-time greats, let's say?
So he's at 956 right now. We're going to assume he's going to get to 1,000 receiving yards, right? He's already at 8 touchdowns. These are the only rookies that have had 1,000 receiving yards and 8 or more touchdowns in a season since 1990. There's 10 players on this list. It's Jamar Chase, AJ Brown, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., Calvin Benjamin, which is the only bad guy in this list, Keenan Allen, Marcus Colston, Anquan Bolden, and Randy Moss. Now, if he gets up to 10 touchdowns, which he still has 3 games to do, he's going to join Jamar Chase, OBJ, Mike Evans, and Randy Moss as the only guys that have 1,010. So what he's doing, it puts him, like historically, if you look at other guys who've done it, he's going to have a good career in the NFL.
I mean, those are some pretty elite names to be in company with. And I mean, I think what makes his performance all the more impressive is like, the lack of expectations. He's currently the wide receiver 6 in overall scoring here in half PPR scoring formats. What makes it more impressive is the fact that this just hasn't been the Jaguars' year offensively, and nor has it really ever been, I guess it feels like. But you know, Trevor Lawrence continued to have injuries and out for the year, shoulder injury, concussion. You know, they've lost a ton of weapons. You know, it's really kind of just Brian Thomas Jr. out there, and he's still managing to win with his athleticism and playmaking abilities, even with Mac Jones at quarterback. And I think that makes it all the more impressive and exciting for the dynasty managers that maybe got to trade for him or draft him a little bit later than he should have been valued. Because if this is his floor on what is a pretty bad offense with a lack of other playmakers around to, you know, maybe deter some defensive coverage, that's got to mean really good things for his long-term outlook.
The thing we were most worried about with him is we knew he could be a good deep threat, right? But we didn't know if he could be a number one option and get those heavy targets and do well with that kind of workload. And he's already showing it in his first year because he's been put in this position. So yeah, he is a deep threat, and that's what they used him for in the beginning of the year. And then he was also able to be the number one guy. Like, they have to use him right now with a backup quarterback. So everything Brian Thomas Jr. has showed this year has been amazing. And I'm really happy for him because I loved him coming out of school.
Fun fact, in the month of June, we actually had Xavier Worthy being drafted ahead of Brian Thomas Jr. in rookie startup drafts, which is pretty incredible for Dynasty League football. Let's talk about some other winners real quick. I want to talk about Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's a player that he's just kind of been on this weekly list of winners. He continues to impress, surpassed 1,000 scrimmage yards in week 15, finally looking like a former first round pick, right? But I think it's becoming clear that he's kind of taken over as the primary receiving option here in the Seattle Seahawks offense. So I have a pretty tough question for you, Michelle. Would you rather roster Jackson Smith-Njigba or DK Metcalf in Dynasty right now, knowing what we know?
Knowing what we know, obviously JSN has more value, so I'd rather roster him. I would not trade away DK Metcalf right now, though. This is pretty much the lowest you'd be trading him away. I don't think he's going to be on the Seahawks much longer, right? Like, I don't even know if next year he'll be on the Seahawks. Like, let him change teams. Hopefully he lands in a better spot. Even if you want to trade him after he changes teams, right? Imagine if he goes to the Chiefs and you're like, I'm like, his value is going to skyrocket pretty much no matter where he goes, because especially if he's going to be a number one again. Geno Smith is dealing with an injury right now, though, so that's kind of stinky for Jackson Smith-Njigba, who has been doing so great, basically just based off the volume, because it's not like his efficiency has been through the roof or anything, but he's been a very consistent scorer. If you could trade JSN now, would you, though, while he's at his value so high?
Here's the thing. I'm a believer in the talent of Jackson Smith-Njigba, and I think that's kind of the thing for me. I've said it on this show before, so if you guys are everydayers here, you've heard it. I can't get over the fact that, we were so impatient with JSN year one. Obviously didn't come out and he wasn't a world beater. There was still a lot of involvement in that offense for Tyler Lockett, plenty of targets for DK Metcalf. But I also look back at the overall talent of Jackson Smith-Njigba and his overall skill set coming out of OSU. I'll remind you all, there was a time that he was on the field with Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson, Marvin Harrison Jr. even, and he was still the best wide receiver on that field and the most productive. So I'm a believer. I don't want to sell high, but are you saying that, like let's say you had maybe JSN, right? And the DK Metcalf manager wants to swap you 1-for-1. In a 1-for-1 swap, which player would you rather roster?
I'm taking JSN just because the value.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Okay. I mean, yeah, definitely more trade value right now. Closing out this winter segment, I feel like we would be doing a disservice as Baker Mayfield fans here who named our dog after Baker Mayfield to not talk about just the entire Bucs passing offense as big time winners. And I feel like we could have this conversation every week, but Baker Mayfield just posted his 8th game of 20 or more fantasy points. Jalen McMillan posted another double-digit fantasy day, 16 fantasy points in half PPR scoring formats. Kind of coming on a little bit and finding his groove alongside Mike Evans. Like, do you just want all of the Buccaneers offensive players here in your dynasty leagues? Like, I just kind of want to pick them off trees and stash them everywhere.
It's going to be interesting with Jalen McMillan because, it's not too late around a wide receiver. He was drafted in the 3rd round. He's playing this Chris Godwin role. He's not as good as Chris Godwin, obviously, but he's starting to score touchdowns as of late. I mean, he really is that second target right now outside of Mike Evans, and the touchdowns coming are huge for him. He's on the field a ton, and we'll see when Chris Godwin's ready to come back next year, if he is back with this team at all. I mean, he's under contract, but Jalen McMillan has an interesting spot here to really prove himself at the end of this year.
Yeah, I mean, Jalen McMillan, if he does continue to prove that he can kind of slot in as this team's wide receiver too, you're right, like in an interesting position because of draft capital, because of the opportunity. And Chris Godwin could hit free agency next year if they don't come to some long-term agreement. And maybe if Jalen McMillan does continue to produce, that'll influence their perception of Chris Godwin and the overall market. We've got to get into some losers. We're going to talk about all of the big time losers coming out of week 15 next.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. As an adult, you make time to learn new things as often as you'd like, or was that lost in childhood? I know a lot of us adults can get all sucked up in our adult responsibilities and kind of just go with the flow and say we're not allowed to have fun anymore. We're not allowed to be curious. But for me, online therapy made me realize I don't have to be. I was like working in recruiting. I loved fantasy football. I loved the NFL, but I never considered that, I considered that a hobby, not something I could go do as a job. But online therapy, I got to talk through that, talk about my love for the sport of NFL. And it really made me curious again about maybe I can do this for my job. So online therapy is a huge reason why I'm sitting here in front of you today and on this podcast and doing everything I'm doing in my career. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you don't have to stress about that because you can switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Just visit betterhelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Give online therapy a try and get on your way to being your best self. It's that time of the year. The college football playoff is back. And with the newly expanded 12-team format, it's guaranteed to be bigger and better than ever, bringing you all the hard-hitting and high-flying excitement that you love. TNT Sports coverage of the college football playoff begins December 21st, starting with the college football playoff kickoff show presented by AT&T at 11 a.m. Eastern. Leading into our first matchup, the Southern Methodist University Mustangs battling the Penn State Nittany Lions at noon. Then the Clemson Tigers look to upset the Texas Longhorns in a showdown at 4 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss a moment of the action. Watch the college football playoff presented by Allstate live on TNT, True TV, TBS, and Max.
Welcome back into the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are covering all the news coming out of Week 15, Dynasty winners, Dynasty losers. Next up, we've got the Dynasty losers. Michelle, we have to talk about whether or not it's time to panic about some certain Dynasty assets that maybe we had higher expectations for that let us down in Week 15. And the first guy we've got to talk about is Marvin Harrison Jr., who, I'm going to be honest, not just a Week 15 disappointment. It's been an entire rookie season full of disappointment for this guy who we kind of all had as this consensus wide receiver one in our rookie rankings. But has he looked like it? No. 2 catches, 32 receiving yards, 0 touchdowns. Just not been able to carve out a role as a focal point of the pass attack there in Arizona. What do we do with Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Yeah, he's been a huge disappointment. I mean, like he doesn't even have any competition out of Trey McBride, right? Like that's all true. It's not like another wide receiver stepped up big time and, really outshined Marvin Harrison. And that's why he's taking a back seat. They're trying to get him the targets. They're trying to get him going. It's just not working. And his fantasy points, I mean, he had that huge first half in week 2. He had a really nice week 8 game. And outside of that, it's just been absolutely terrible or just very, very mediocre. So huge disappointment. I don't think anything's going to change unless they change their offensive coordinator. And I don't know if that will be the fix, right? It might just be, who knows? Maybe Marvin Harrison could be a bust. I'm still willing to give him a shot. It's only his first year. Guys can get much better as they go on, but they need to change something. They're not going to change Kyler Murray. So the only hope I think we have is if they change offensive play callers this offseason.
Yeah, I think we saw Marvin Harrison Jr. just kind of pivoted into this role that he's going to play on the outside. We're not going to use his size, speed, like that whole package that he offers. He's 6'4". He's got still the juice to like play over the middle of the field. Imagine that mismatch against opposing linebackers. Like, they just haven't gotten overly creative here with Marvin Harrison Jr. and it showed. And I think a big thing that you have to ask is like, what was your pre-draft evaluation of Marvin Harrison Jr.? Because I'm going to be honest, I'm like, yeah, I'm a little panicked about the situation, about the usage, about the fact that like him and Kyler Murray just haven't looked like they're clicking, right? Like the offense hasn't been conducive to some of these big explosion games that we kind of thought were coming, especially after that week 2 game. But I still think you have to go back and almost look at like the Jackson Smith and Jigba, who we talked about in segment 1. We gave up on Jackson Smith and Jigba rather quickly. And
well, there was a difference though. He was playing behind DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and we knew it might be slow for him, like the Roma Dunze, and that's why we're not so upset about Roma Dunze right now, because we figured it would go slow start for him with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. No one thought it was going to be a slow start for Marvin Harrison because the opportunity he was being placed in immediately. JSN wasn't given this opportunity, and Harrison is. So I do think there's a little bit of a difference there.
Little bit of a difference, but I still think like we have been so spoiled with immediate wide receiver production. And again, I'm not here to defend Marvin Harrison Jr. either. Like, he has not been a perfect player, hasn't necessarily looked like the same player coming out of OSU in this offense, but I'm a believer in the talent, and I'm a believer in the tape that he put out at OSU. Again, same offense as JSN here. So like maybe we're just going to see like the late bloomers here coming out of OSU, but I still think way too early. And this is just kind of me tempering expectations for myself and reminding myself that like, okay, even if your evaluation doesn't come to fruition right away, that things might not be so bad. Let's talk about the wide receivers in Miami who, I'm going to be honest, the Miami Dolphins passing game under Tua, we have seen it shine. We have seen it not shine at all. But we know that there's kind of been this opportunity that's been waxing and waning for both of these star wide receivers. Jalen Waddle coming down with a knee injury. Again, injuries have been a problem for him. Tyreek Hill, lots of inconsistencies there. What do we make of this receiving core right now? Because they have a big problem, and the big problem is named Johnny Smith.
Well, I guess that's the problem. But with Jalen Waddle, his problem is he can't stay healthy at all, right?
Yeah.
I have 0 shares of Jalen Waddle, and I would never want one, because anytime he makes a play, he's going to be off that field. He'll come back. But I don't think I've ever sat through a Dolphins game where he did not have to leave the game at some point, even if it was just for a little bit, with an injury. I've never seen someone always have to leave the game. It's crazy.
I feel like it's just kind of bad luck, because like I feel like every time I look at the screen specifically, like he gets dinged on something. Like yesterday, he didn't even get caught up on a play. He got caught up in the skirmish kind of thing after the play. Like maybe he just has like the world's worst luck, or I don't know. I hate to use the word injury prone, but it has been a concern for a guy that's, a little bit undersized and I don't know. It's hard to know, because the upside's pretty significant for a player like Jalen Waddle. But man, we have not seen it this year, and we haven't seen that consistency for Tyreek Hill either, who we have to worry about that age component.
That you do have to worry about the age thing. He's turning 31. I feel like he still does have the speed. I think right now defenses have just caught on to Mike McDaniel and the system and Tua, and know what works for them, and they're not letting them get deep. So Tyreek Hill is just kind of getting taken out of the game, or when he is involved, it's a lot shorter receptions, and he's just not able to get those big plays this year. Maybe it's the wrist injury that's hurting him a bit, but I don't really think like his speed is gone. You can still see the speed out there in week 1. Oh my goodness. He still was dominant. I don't think that's what's just gone away. But Mike McDaniel, if he's still going to be here this next year, he's going to have to reevaluate his system and kind of change it up. That's what you have to do in the NFL. Your system can't work forever. It's only like a couple years at a time, and then defenses catch up, and they have. So that makes me worried about both Tua and Tyreek moving forward if Mike McDaniel can't figure out how to change it up.
Yeah, definitely have to make those adjustments. And it's all about how well can you make the adjustments to the adjustment. I definitely think the wrist injury could be playing into just how he's playing the game in general. But he's under contract with the Miami Dolphins through 2026. Like you said, 30 years old, about to turn 31 here, not too far out. But I do think in general, we've probably seen the peak for Tyreek Hill come and go. I don't think we're going to get the 2,000 receiving yard season out of Tyreek Hill, unfortunately. But in terms of like a player that's going to return value into his early 30s here, I think Tyreek Hill is probably a guy that maybe explore the market with in your dynasty leagues, because I do think that the upside, again, kind of tremendous. Probably not a guy that you're going to want to target right now while they're trying to figure out these health issues. But age bias is so real. Like, how much do we play in that age factor in terms of his long-term value for dynasty? I think it's a factor, but maybe not the biggest one. Last but not least, I think we should talk about, just in general, like the Miami Dolphins passing attack. Because again, not fantastic, but I want to talk about a different part of the passing attack that's kind of, I don't know, confusing me. And we're going to get into some of our most confusing dynasty evaluations right now coming out of week 13, including Jonnu Smith next.
This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Take the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win that first $5 bet. The FanDuel Sportsbook app is super easy to use, and it gives you everything you need in one place to place all your live bets on the NFL. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. We still have 2 games tonight. We'll see how fun they are, because they're kind of lopsided games in both of them. But a bet can always make a game fun. And a bet I liked for tonight is Kirk Cousins to throw at least 2 touchdowns at minus 118. If you want to get crazy, you can go 3 touchdowns at plus 350. The last 4 games, he hasn't thrown a touchdown. He doesn't have. He's been so bad. But the Raiders defense is also really bad. No Max Crosby. And I think Kirk Cousins, he can't be bad forever, right? He's going to come through tonight. I really feel it. So again, those 3 touchdowns, if you want to get crazy, at plus 350, safer, then you can go to the 2 at minus 118. So again, just go to FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are giving our takes on everything from week 15, including the winners, losers. And next up, we have to talk about some confusing dynasty player evaluations right now that have us just a little bit kerfuffled. And I got to say, Jonnu Smith topping the list for me. We talked about how kind of murky this pass attack is in our loser segment, but there's one player in this Dolphins offense that is not losing, and that is Jonnu Smith, who might be the world's most unlikely league winner at the tight end position ever.
I mean, he keeps scoring the touchdowns, right? And I have a league where it looks like I might make the championship, and I'm going to start Jonnu Smith over Travis Kelce. And it's insane. Now, I don't know if I believe in him in the future for Dynasty. I think right now this Dolphins offense is broken, and that's why they're looking elsewhere, and they just need someone to pass to. But it's not like it's making great results, right, for this Dolphins offense. So I don't think they're going to go into this offseason and say, we need to get Jonnu Smith to be the focal point of our offense. Like, I think they're going to try to work their wide receivers back into this offense. So in Dynasty, I don't know how high of a value I'm like putting him. But obviously for the rest of this year, yeah, he seems like he's a real safe bet.
Yeah, rest of this year, I think he's probably locked and loaded. 740 receiving yards, 6 touchdowns on 70 receptions. I do think you're right, though. I think a part of Jonnu Smith's involvement, I think, in general, his efficiency metrics did indicate that he was still a promising tight end with upside if he were to see the target volume. But I think kind of like situations where we see maybe the running backs targeted at a super high rate. Usually it's not the goal of your offense. And I don't think the goal of their offense is really to limit Tyreek Hill's involvement, to limit Jalen Waddle's offensive involvement. I think it's definitely more of a symptom of things going wrong in Miami than it is the goal in Miami, which I'm going to ride Jonnu Smith into the championship here. I'm going to enjoy my celebrations, and then I'm probably going to try to ship him off to anybody who maybe can be a little bit of a sucker, and take him off my hands when the time comes this year. How about just the general Philadelphia Eagles passing attack? So like in, this game against the Steelers, week 15 came out and there was a lot of talk about the passing game. I think they put a particular emphasis on that, but I don't think when it comes to the end of the day, you're really looking at this as a pass first offense. We know what they want to do, and they want to run the ball.
They want to run the ball, and I'm more worried about Devonta Smith, obviously, than A.J. Brown. Now, they both had great weeks this week, but they clearly were coming out focusing on passing. The Steelers were stopping the run. They knew the Steelers were going to focus on stopping the run. People have been talking about their passing game all week long, saying they didn't have it, and they came out and proved they had it, right? I think A.J. Brown's going to be fine. Like, even in this run-heavy offense, he's still the go-to guy. It doesn't matter when they do pass the ball, even if it's just 15 to 20 times in a game, a lot of those are going to go to A.J. Brown anyways, and we know he can have those big plays. Now, Devonta Smith, did you know that yesterday it was actually his first game of his career with 10 plus receptions and 100 plus receiving yards?
No, that's kind of.
I was shocked by that. He doesn't typically get that many targets, right? And before, in previous seasons, when Dallas Goedert was out, that's when you could really trust Devonta Smith. That hasn't been so much the case this year. I mean, this last week, great. The 3 prior weeks to that, though, were terrible. Devonta Smith has been this like low end wide receiver too. We know his talent, and we know if he was given the targets like a JSN, right? If he's ever given the workload like a Jackson Smith-Njigba, it would end up being pretty solid. I just don't know if he ever has the upside to be a top 8 guy in this league. And then we know what the downside is in any given week. He could give you a straight up 0 for all. Like he's done that before, and he's been killing people. So Devonta Smith is not necessarily someone I want in Dynasty.
Yeah, it gets really hard because you do know the upside of the passing attack. When it's working, when Jalen Hurts and the receivers are clicking, you know that there are a ton of points that could be had within this offense. But you know what you don't know is like, are they ever going to target, Devonta Smith in the end zone when they've got Saquon Barkley? And if it's not Saquon Barkley, it's the tush push. And if it's not the tush push, maybe it's A.J. Brown. They have so many weapons here. And I do think that on a week-to-week basis, it's probably going to be Devonta Smith, who's like the odd man out. Has had a relatively safe floor this year. We finally saw a little bit of that upside, but it's a confusing evaluation, right? Because there's so much explosive playmaking in him, but it just doesn't translate to the stat sheet consistently enough that, I don't know, he kind of tugs on my heartstrings a little bit. Last but not least, I want to talk about James Conner real quick and get your vibes. He has a contract extension in place. He is the overall RB1 ahead of Monday Night Football. He will be 30 next season. What is your temperature check on James Conner? Because he's probably one of the guys that I'm having the toughest time evaluating in Dynasty right now.
He looks good, right? I know he's 29, going to be 30. He looks good. He's like the only good part of this Cardinals offense right now. Him and Trey McBride. Obviously, the wheels are going to have to fall off like they do for all running backs. He's still under contract for 1 more year. I think he might have 1 more good year in him. I feel like we've been saying that about James Conner, though, for the last 5 years. Like 1 more good year, 1 more good year. He's a good player. He might be someone that I'm just willing to, ride off in the sunset with in Dynasty. Just keep riding him until the wheels fall off. And because it's not like he has this great trade value ever, right? Because everyone always thinks, well, he's about to fall off. I mean,
RB32 right now.
Yeah. Has Conner ever had good trade value? Not really. Not since his early days in Pittsburgh. So you might as well just keep riding him until there's nothing left, because it's not like you're missing out on a whole lot if you do try to trade him.
I actually think that's a great point. I think that, honestly, even dating back to his days in Pittsburgh, there was always a level of skepticism about whether or not he could keep it up. So yeah, I think you're right. I think we probably just have to like keep rolling with James Conner, who's going to be like in every single year, huge value at the running back position. Michelle, thank you so much for joining us. That is our week 15 recap in review. Tell everybody where they can find more of you and your work.
Yeah, so I'm on X at Bob Blaston, Bob Blast EM. I'm on Blue Sky Social. It's my name, Michelle Magdziuk, Magdziuk. I write for PFF, All Fantasy. I write for NFL.com, some fantasy work. I'm a researcher with NFL Network. And then I also do a podcast here on Locked On for fantasy football with Vinny Iyer. You can find us Monday through Friday, just like you do here. Just instead of the Dynasty pod, we're just the redraft fantasy football podcast.
Love that so much. Thank you so much again for joining us. Tomorrow we'll be back. We'll be recapping all the action from Monday Night Football, looking ahead, maybe giving some sneaky waiver wire ads if we can find some deep, deep names here in the Dynasty depths. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye, y'all.